Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where today we'll be talking about this terrifying book by Brian Lumley. This is Necroscope II, Vamphyri. Yes, the second in the Necroscope series, Necroscope II, Vamphyri. I think Vamphyri is how you pronounce it. I've seen this a couple times now on BookTube, and everybody pronounces it different. But I have it under good authority that it is Vamphyri, so that's what I'm calling it. That's what I'm calling this book, Necroscope II. This is a pretty good book. So a couple months ago, or thereabouts, I did a review for the first novel in this series, which was this awesome book, Necroscope. And in Necroscope, we meet Harry Coe, who is a necroscope, and that is a person who can speak to the dead, and the dead talk right back to him, because in this world that Brian Lumley has created, death is not the end. Your consciousness and your spirit live on past your demise and sort of haunts the area where your last remains would be. So wherever your last remains are, that is where your consciousness will reside. But you're all alone there, your consciousness, until Harry shows up and talks to you. So the dead love Harry, because not only does Harry enable them to have talks with him, but he enables the dead to speak to each other. So Harry is a talented man. Now in this book, he goes up against a necromancer. And the necromancer, who got his powers from a vampire, can tear the secrets from the dead, from dead bodies. He'll tear apart a dead body, and that's how he gets the secrets of the dead. Not just talking like old Harry does. So in the first book, Harry joins a secret government agency in Britain, which is full of people with ESP-like powers or powers like that. And there is a similar branch in the USSR. This takes place in the 70s, this novel. It was published in the 80s, but it takes place in the 70s. And so that's what this book was about. That confrontation between the Necroscope and the Necromancer and these two secret agencies. So, Necroscope II, Vamphyri, takes place right after that, more or less. And it is the second chapter in what became a very long series. And this is an excellent book. Really exciting book, very pulpy, still in a very pulpy style, just like the first book, Necroscope was. That said, I don't think Brian Lumley gets enough credit nowadays as a writer. He is a really good writer. He's very effective. So while his stories are pulp adventure horror stories, they're really well written. He has a great sense of action. He writes action very well, which is difficult to do. And he's also very good with the terrifying, scary parts. And there are quite a few of them in this book. So in this book, the vampires, as the title might suggest, take a more prominent role. In the first Necroscope book, there were vampires in it, but they weren't the central horror of the book. In this, we start to see that vampires are the main threat to humanity. And this book has some great vampires in it. There's three main vampires that show up in this book. There are more than that, but there are three main ones. And they're all great. They're all different from each other, and they're all great in their own way. Very evil, very scary creatures, the vampires. And so the British government agency actually kind of teams up in a way with the Russian agency to fight the threat of these vampires, because Harry finds out Harry Coe finds out that these vampires are becoming a real threat. And that's what this book is about, the growing threat of the vampires. And like I said, the action is great, the pace is excellent in this story. It has some genuinely frightening moments, which I was happy about. The vampires are just creepy as all hell. The vampires in this series, they're kind of a parasitic organism that latches on to a human being and turns it into a vampire creature. But it's a lot different than the vampires that we are familiar with from novels and films. The vampires in this are kind of their own thing. They're kind of a cosmic horror type of vampire, which doesn't surprise me because Brian Lumley was very influenced by the work of H.P. Lovecraft, and it shows. He was also very influenced by Robert E. Howard. That also shows. And so while he is his own writer, he writes in his own way, you can see those influences in this series. So this is a lot of fun, Necroscope II. I enjoyed it a lot. It probably isn't as good as the first one, only because in the first one we had a great central character in Harry Coe. We had a great central character in Harry. But in this one, he has transformed for the most of the book into a kind of supernatural, purely supernatural being. He's a kind of ghost. A time-traveling, teleporting ghost. But he's a kind of ghost through most of this. This book is weird, man. There's some weird stuff in the Necromancer books. So he'll just throw out some just weird stuff that you weren't expecting every once in a while. Did I mention that Harry also has the power to raise up zombies to help him out when he needs it? Yeah, he has that ability, which is handy to be able to just, have a bunch of zombies crawl out of a graveyard to come and help you. That's a good skill. That kind of thing happens in these books. Just a lot of crazy stuff happens. And the vampires are, like I said, vividly described. So, like I said, the problem in this book is that Harry doesn't play as central a role. He's kind of this supernatural being. And so while Harry is still in it, and he still plays a very important part, it doesn't focus as much on Harry. It focuses more on the agents of the two different secret government branches. So we learn a lot more about the agents and the agencies. The only problem is we never get to know any of the agents that well. And it's probably just as well. You don't want to get attached to any of these characters, I'll just say that. There's a high body count in this book. It's a pretty high body count. And so while we get to know them a bit, the secret agents, we really don't get to know any of them that well. And there's quite a few of them. And so we don't have like one central character that we're following through most of the story, or even two. The most interesting characters in this book are the vampires. The main vampire villains are really interesting, and when he tells their stories, it's riveting. I mean, you just want to read that, because the vampire sections in this book, and there's a lot of vampires in this one, are really, really interesting stories. And like I said, there's some pretty frightening vampires in this story. They're not your run-of-the-mill vampires. So while it's not as good as the first Necroscope book, it's pretty good. The pacing's great, the action's great, the horror's great. We just don't have as much of the central character, Harry Coe, as we really ought to have. Although I think that might change in the third book, which is the next one I'm going to be reading, which is Necroscope III, The Source, which has another awesome cover. All these Necroscope books, man, they had awesome covers. And so originally, according to the back of this one, it was going to be a trilogy of terror. So originally, I guess the idea was that this one was going to finish off the series. Well, that wasn't true. I think there's like 15 of them by now. Something like that. Which I'm glad. Brian Lumley is just like, he just kept going, man. So this is the next one I'm going to be reading. I don't know if I'll be able to get to it this year or not. I'm hoping to. I'm hoping to get to this maybe towards the end of December, but we will see. But I really want to read this after having read this. I mean, you definitely want to continue the series after the first couple books, man, because they are a ride, let me tell you. So that was Necroscope II Vamphyri. Really interesting book, pulpy stuff. I mean, it's not deep stuff, the Necroscope series. But you know what? You don't really want it to be. Sometimes it's fun just to read some pulp action, horror, adventure stuff. And that's what this is. Secret agents, vampires, zombies, all kinds of stuff in these books. So yeah, there you go. That was my review of Necroscope II. An excellent, excellent book.